All right. Well, welcome everybody to another wonderful Sabbath. A little wet outside, but hey, we always need that, and at least it's not snow, right? So, anyway, today I wanted to share something with you that I had debated on whether I should give it or not, because I really like to I like to my sermons to be my own, my own content I like to come up with. But I wanted to give you a sermon that was given back in 1788. I wanted to share this with you. I had debated about this for a little while, whether I should give it or not, but some of the brethren encouraged me, said, yeah, go ahead, do it. I thought it might be a little dry, because there's a lot of archaic language back then that our modern ear is not in tune to. So what I did is some of that really archaic, some of our words, I just changed them for some more modern vernacular, so make it a little easier on our hearing. But this was given by one of the founding fathers of the country back in 1788, and he was a patriot, but he was also a preacher. And the message he gave was the Republic of the Israelites, an example to the American states. And, in our modern days, I think, it's fitting because, it reaches back to the founding of our country, number one. And it gives us some insight into the men who helped establish it. And contrary to, modern day views, the church and state worked together hand in glove back then. And that's the way it was intended. That's the way it was intended for the common good. The state could not infringe upon the church, but the church had every right to participate and not be excluded from the public forum, nor, government proceedings, where they would open with prayer many times. So, and there's many examples of this in our history to prove this fact, because, there were, some people try to say that we are not a Christian nation. We are not a Christian nation. Now, they would be correct in only one sense, and only partly, because the best deceptions and lies often have a partial truth to them. So there is a partial truth to that. But also, often two things can be true at the same time. While we are not a Christian nation in the sense that our charter, and what I mean by our charter, our founding documents, they don't explicitly state that we are a Christian nation. The truth is, and the fact remains, that we are a nation founded by Christians who have testified and acknowledged that our rights come from God, the Creator. And as students of the Bible, they based our system of morality and law, as flawed as it may be nowadays, but it's still better than anywhere else in the world. Well, they based those laws of morality on the principles that are derived from the Bible, Old and New Testaments. And our system of government was designed to function within the confines of the morality and the principles outlined in the Scriptures. This is undeniable fact. It is truth. Okay? And since this is a year where we're facing a major election, which I believe is gravely important to the future of the church in this country, I think that this talk could be quite fitting. So, I talked about this man earlier. Well, who was this patriot preacher? Well, he was a native of Boston who graduated from Harvard in 1740 along with Samuel Adams as a classmate, and also a friend who he shared his political views with. In 1745, he served as chaplain to the New Hampshire Regiment during King George's War, when the British allied with the U.S. colonies and had taken Louisburg, which is in modern-day Nova Scotia, from the French. So he was present during that battle. In 1747, he was ordained a pastor, and he became the pastor of the North Church of Portsmouth, New Hampshire. He earned his Doctor of Divinity degree from the University of Aberdeen in 1762. In 1774, he became the president of Harvard University. Imagine that, a preacher, right? So, one of his most popular sermons was titled, "Government Corrupted by Vice and Recovered by Righteousness." Now, that some of his sermons and the talk I'm going to give today, or at least the talk that it's based on, I asked Steve if we'd be able to post PDFs in full, because I can't do his whole sermon here. It's way too long. You think I'm long-winded. You should see this guy's. I mean, we would be here 2 hours getting through one of his sermons. But so I had to compress it and condense it. So, for the purpose of time. So, well, this man, he was also an acquaintance of George Washington. And in 1775, when Washington had gone to Boston to accept the command of the Continental Army, he briefly established his headquarters at this preacher patriot's home, because he was then president of Harvard, and he was living in the president's house at Harvard. And also, in those PDFs, I'll include a letter that he did send to Washington after that stay. So, in 1780, this man also became a charter member of the American Academy of Arts and Science, founded by many of the founding fathers themselves, including John Adams and John Hancock. In 1788, he championed the U.S. Constitution and was a prominent delegate from New Hampshire at the convention that adopted the Constitution. And on top of all this, he published a couple of books, two of them titled The Summary of Christian Faith and Practice, and another one titled Observations on Revelation. So that's quite a resume, okay? He was a patriot, a preacher, a soldier, an author, a politician, and a college president. So who is this founding father? Well, his name was Samuel Langdon. All right, Samuel Langdon. Now, most of you have probably never heard of him, because when we think of founding fathers, we typically limit it to Washington, Jefferson, Franklin, Adams, Hamilton, maybe Revere and Hancock, right? You can count them on basically a hand and a half. That's what we think of as the founding fathers. But they're not the only ones who fought to establish this country. There were many who signed our founding documents, helped establish the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. There was there were hundreds of men like Langdon who were heavily involved in these efforts. And you know what? They were all Christian. All of them were Christian. Now, some try to say, or they try to make a case, that a small group of them, less than a handful of men like Washington, Jefferson, Franklin, and I think the other one might have been Paine, okay? They claimed, that they were not Christian. Well, because they were either Masons or maybe deists, some of them. And that may or may not be very accurate, and I take issue with a couple of them, but that's for another time, for another debate. But in any event, the unavoidable fact is that even if you take that small, less than a handful of people out, which I think is really only one or two when you get down to it, some people claim 4, but again, if you take them out, you're still left with hundreds of founders who identified as Christians, clearly as Christians, no doubt, okay? So, in any event, let's get into the main topic. And I've titled it Samuel Langdon and the Republic of Israel. Now, he intended this as a lesson for the new nation to walk uprightly, and that lesson, I think, applies even more to us today in our current state. So Langdon's sermon, let me give you the title of his sermon now. It was The Republic of the Israelites, an Example to the American States. Now, it was his election sermon for the New Hampshire before it ratified the Constitution in 1788. Now, like I said, I can't read the whole thing, but I'm going to get the main points out from his sermon. And the entirety will be on our website, which is cognj.org, once Steve gets it posted. So, here we go. Mr. Langdon's sermon. I think myself happy that, after repeated invitations from this honorable court, I am at length permitted by divine providence, though under particular difficulties and in decline of life, to appear in this place and speak on this public occasion, when the principal officers of government are to be appointed to serve their departments according to the vote of the people. I will endeavor to give due honor to the rulers of the people, while I declare, with simplicity of heart and honest freedom, the admonition which the great Lord of the universe gives, and offer my best thoughts as to the general administration of public affairs and the way to secure the prosperity and happiness of a nation. There is a remarkable paragraph in the sacred writings which may be very well accommodate to my present purpose. It merits particular attention. And you have it in Deuteronomy 4, 5-8. Behold, I have taught you statutes and judgments, even as the Lord my God commanded me, that you should do so in the land where you go to possess it. Keep therefore and do them, for this is your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the nations, who shall hear all these statutes and say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. For what nation is there so great, which has God so near unto them, as the Lord our God is in all things, that we can call upon him for? And what nation is there so great, which has statutes and judgments so right, as all this law which I set before you this day? So here, Moses recommends to Israel the strict observance of all the laws which he has delivered to them by God's command, relating both to their civil society and religion, as the sure way to raise their reputation high among all nations, as a wise and understanding people, because no other nation was blessed with such an excellent national law or advantage of applying to the advice of the living God and praying to him in all difficulties, with assurance that all their requests would be answered. As to everything excellent in their constitution of government, except what was made peculiar to them as a nation separated to God from the rest of mankind, the Israelites may be considered as a pattern to the world in all ages. And from them we may learn that we will exalt our character and what will depress and bring us to ruin. Let us therefore look over their constitution and laws and inquire into their practices and observe how their prosperity and fame depended on their strict observance of divine commands, both as to their government and religion. They had both a civil and a military. They had an establishment under divine direction and a complete body of judicial law drawn up and delivered to them by Moses in God's name. They had also a form of religious worship by the same authority, minutely prescribed, designed to preserve among them the knowledge of the great Creator of the universe, and teach them to love and serve him, while idolatry prevailed throughout the rest of the world. And this religion contained not only a public ritual, but a perfect, though very concise, system of morals, comprehended in 10 commandments, which required the perfection of godliness, kindness, righteousness, and righteous conduct. Therefore, upon the complaint of Moses that the burden of government was too heavy for him, God commanded him to bring 70 men, chosen from among the elders and officers, and to present them at the tabernacle. And there he endured them with the same spirit which was in Moses, that they might bear the burden with him. Thus, a senate was effectively constituted as necessary for the future government of the nation under a chief commander. And as to the choice of this senate, doubtless the people were consulted, who appear to have had a voice in all public affairs from time to time, the whole congregation being called together on all important occasions. The government, therefore, was a proper republic. And besides this general establishment, every tribe had elders and a prince according to the patriarchal order, with which Moses did not interfere. And these had acknowledged right to meet and consult together, and with the consent of the congregation do whatever was necessary to preserve good order, and to promote the common interest of the tribe, so that the government of each tribe was very similar to the general government. There was a president and a senate at the head of each, and the people assembled and gave their voice in all great matters. For in those ages the people in all republics were entirely unacquainted with the way of appointing delegates to act for them, which is a very excellent modern improvement in the management of republics. Moreover, to complete the establishment of civil government, courts were to be appointed in every walled city after they had settled in Canaan. The elders, most distinguished for wisdom and integrity, were to be made judges, ready always to sit and decide the common controversies within their respective jurisdictions. The people had a right likewise to appoint such other officers as they might think necessary for the more effectual execution of justice, according to that order given in Deuteronomy 16, 18 and 19. Judges and officers shall you make thee in all your gates, which the Lord your God gives you through your tribes. And they shall judge the people with just judgment. You shall not twist judgment. You shall not respect persons, neither take a gift. For a gift does blind the eye of the wise and pervert the words of the righteous. But from these courts, an appeal was allowed in weightier matters to higher courts appointed over the whole tribe. And in very great and difficult cases, the supreme authority of the general senate and chief magistrate. A government, thus, settled on republican principles required laws, without which it must have degenerated immediately into aristocracy or absolute monarchy. But God did not leave a people wholly unskilled in legislation. To make laws for them, he took this important matter wholly into his own hands. And besides the moral laws of the two tablets which directed their conduct as individuals, he gave them by Moses a complete code of judicial law. God himself being eminently their king, and manifesting himself among them in the visible manner by the cloud of the glory in the tabernacle and the temple. This was the reason why blasphemy and all obstinate disobedience to his laws were considered as high treason and punished with death, especially idolatry, as being a crime against the fundamental principles of the Constitution. But far the greater part of the judicial law were founded on the plain, immutable principles of reason, justice, and social virtue, such as are always necessary for a civil society. Life and property were well guarded, and punishments were equitably adapted to the nature of every crime. In particular, murder stands foremost among capital crimes and is defined with such precision and so clearly distinguished from all cases of accidental and undesigned killing that the innocent were in no danger of punishment and the guilty could not escape. And if we pay regard to this divine law, which is evidently founded on reason and justice, the modern distinction of manslaughter must be rejected as a popish invention, contrived and added in times when superstition reigned and claimed a power above all laws. These laws were sufficient for a nation which had but little commerce abroad, especially as the advice of Jehovah might be consulted in all cases of a very extraordinary nature. Let us now consider the national worship which God established among his people, on which their obedience to the moral law very much depended. For unless they paid constant reverence and homage to their God, agreeable to his nature and will, they would soon break loose from all other obligations to morality. Now, as to their ritual, however contemptible or even ridiculous it may seem to men whose ideas are all modern, and who proudly scorn divine revelation, and, notwithstanding, it is now repealed by a far more glorious revelation of grace and truth by Jesus Christ. No religious institution could be more perfectly accommodated to those early ages of the world and the situation for the Israelites in the midst of idolaters, or better prepare the way for the truth and mercy of the gospel. Therefore, it was necessary for the worship of the true God should not be destitute of the splendor in those ages. It struck the minds of men with awe and reverence. But the ceremonies of worship which God commanded his people to observe were not, like those of the heathen, inhuman, frantic, obscene, varied 1,000 ways according to the different characters of their gods. No, but by infinite wisdom they were calculated to promote the knowledge of the divine perfections and obedience to the laws of the righteousness, and give the most encouraging hope in the in the goodness and mercy of God. The ritual of the Israelites was rational, sober, uniform, plainly intended to exhibit the majesty, purity, and mercy of the eternal King, to humble men before him under continual sense of guilt, and to assure true repentance in free pardon by virtue of the appointed sacrifices, which were types of that one sacrifice which Christ has offered for the sins of the world. It was a long time after the law of Moses was given, and before the rest of the world knew anything of government by law. Where kings reigned, their own will was law. Where popular governments were formed, the impulsive indulgences of the multitude ordered everything just according to present circumstances. Or their senators and judges were left to act according to their best discretion. It was 600 years after Moses, before the Spartans, the most famous of the Grecian republics, received a very imperfect and in some particular ways very absurd code of law from Lycurgus. After this feeble attempt of legislation, 300 years more elapsed before Solon appeared and gave the laws to Athens. Though the city long famous for arms, arts, eloquence, and philosophy, and it was more than 500 years from the first founding of the celebrated Roman Empire. And perhaps our own courts might be so reformed as to prevent cases of inconsiderable value and easy decisions from rising through all the stages of law. Against these imperfections, a good provision was made in the law of Moses, and it might be much better to our advantage to pay greater attention to that example. Upon a review of what has been said, must it not appear quite strange that the Israelites should so speedily attain to such a height of good policy and legislation beyond all other nations? Are we not compelled to acknowledge an immediate intervention and direction from heaven? They would have been in danger of jarring opinions, tumults, insurrections, and probably before the design could be effected, discouragement, confusion would have forced them to surrender into the hands of despots. But their God provided everything necessary for their happiness, and nothing more was left to their own wisdom than to submit to his authority and to adhere strictly to his commands. By this, their reputation among the nations would have been equal to the excellency of their laws. But now you may say, why then were they not universally celebrated? Why did not princes and politicians from all parts of the world visit them to learn principles of societal organization from a so well-regulated nation? Why did not philosophers come and inquire into what system of religion and morality which carried virtue to such a height of perfection? Whereas, on the contrary, the Israelites were often weak, distressed, and generally despised and hated by all their neighbors. The plain answer to this objection is they never adhered in practice either to the principles of their civil institutions or religion, but on their own practice depended the prosperity and honor of a nation. By their own practice, they depended on it. They received their laws from God, but they did not keep it. They neglected their government, corrupted their religion, and grew degenerate in their morals. And in such a situation, no nation under heaven can prosper. Let us review their state in the first place under the judges. Though the National Senate was instituted for the assistance of Moses as the captain general and judge of the nation, and this was a plain indication that in all succeeding times, such a Senate was necessary for the assistance of the supreme magistrate. Yet after Joshua and the elders of his time were dead, it does not appear that they took the least care to fill their places. They left all affairs of the nation to chance or to uncommon wisdom, and had no chief commander, except when God, in compassion to them in their troubles, raised up judges for their deliverance. And as they allowed the general government to drop, we may well think them as careless with the government of the particular tribes. In each tribe, as we have observed, a government ought to have been kept up similar to the national authority by the elders and the princes of the tribes. But we find this remark repeatedly made in the book of Judges. In those days there was no king in Israel, but every man did which was right in his own eyes. That is, in plain terms, there was no authority anywhere, but every man was left to act as he pleased. No wonder, therefore, they were weak in counsel and war, and exposed on every side to the insults of their neighbors, being unable to unite in their own defense. This neglect of government was wholly unexcusable. If they were at a loss of what to do, they had the greatest advisor in the world among them, and they ought to have inquired of God, their king, how to proceed, and what person to choose. And now we cannot wonder if the courts of justice ceased when the higher powers of government were waning. These courts, which should have been continued in every walled city, dwindled away and came to nothing. Crimes were unpunished, and the most abominable vices spread their infection through all the ranks. No law was executed to deter men from their murders, their robberies, their rapes, or any other kinds of wickedness. This is evident by the case of the Levites, whose concubine was abused to death by the mob of Benjaminites at Gilgal. The city in general discovered no inclination to do justice upon the offenders. There was no judges near to whom complaints might be made. No, it seems the whole tribe were ready to back the crime rather than punish it. Nor was there any authority in the nation to take grasp of the matter, and therefore the Levite was obligated to take a method shocking to humanity in order to execute the indignation of the other tribes and bring their forces against the Benjaminites to their destruction. But that which was the main force of all the disorder and misery was their neglect in corrupting that religion which God commanded. As long as those elders lived, who were with Joshua, and had seen all the great works of the Lord which he did for Israel, the people adhered to and worshiped the true God as prescribed in the law. But when they were dead, the impressions which they had made by the miracles wore off, as is natural, and they grew complacent of the worship of the sanctuary, and gave opportunity to their own imaginations, and soon made a mixture of all the superstitions and idolatries of the heathen with the worship of Jehovah. They kept up no method of religious instruction, and as they grew more and more ignorant, they thought it too inconvenient to travel so often from parts of the country to offer sacrifice at the tabernacle, though it was very centrally located at Shiloh, not much more than 80 miles distance from the remotest towns. But every man chose to worship near his home, and so they made groves, and they built altars for themselves, and they soon set up images of Baal and Ashtoreth and other Gentile deities which their neighbors worshiped. By these idols, however, they pretended to worship the true God and brought sacrifices after their own hearts. And they imagined that all the kinds of religions came much to the same thing, and whether precisely agreeable to the commandments or not, would be acceptable if they were sincere. Thus, Micah made images and procured a priest in his own house, which the children of Dan afterwards took and affixed in their new conquered city, in the north bounds of Canaan, where this idolatry continued until the 10 tribes were carried into captivity. Now, by foregoing the view of the general state of the nation during the time of the judges, we may plainly see the reason why, instead of rising to fame by the perfection of their institutions, religion, and morals, their character sank into contempt. But let us see whether they conducted better afterwards under the kings. It was their crime to demand such a king, as was like the kings of the other nations, i.e., a king with absolute power to command all according to his own pleasures. In this view, God only was their king, and the head of the nation was only to be his surrogate. Therefore, as they had rejected the divine government, God gave them a king in his anger, and the consequences of which was the total loss of their republican form of government and the sad experience of the effects of despotic power. Indeed, their religious establishment, which had been very much impaired in the days of the judges, was restored and brought to its greatest glory by David, the most pious, and Solomon, the wisest of kings. And during their reign, the nations gained the height of grandeur, but no national senate was appointed, and the power of the king continued to be despotic. And so the days of their prosperity were soon over. Jeroboam, out of strategy to prevent a reunion with Judah by means of temple worship, placed 2 calves at the extremities of his kingdom and persuaded his people to worship God by them instead of going to Jerusalem. And this false worship, together with a multitude of other idolatries introduced by this means, was the religion of the 10 tribes until they were captivated by the king of Assyria and dispersed among the nations. Nor did Rehoboam pay greater regard to the law of Moses, for he built high places and made images and groves on every high hill and under every green tree, and did according to all the abominations of the heathen. And in the consequences of this, every kind of vice and even sodomy prevailed in the land. Repeated attempts were made by the few pious kings to put a stop to the corruption of the religion and the morals, but all in vain. The people relapsed again and again into ignorance, idolatry, and wickedness. And now, let us take a glance at their general state after their Babylonian captivity. When they returned to their own land, they endeavored to conform to their religion and government to the Mosaic standard. Idolatry was entirely purged out. They discovered great zeal for the law of their God and instituted worship. They appointed a general senate of 70 elders, called by them the Sanhedrin, which with a supreme magistrate at the head, for the governing of the nation. And while their pious zealous continued, they grew to prosper. But according to the common course of things in the world, religion soon degenerated into mere formality, without proper regard to its principal intention, and became only a shadow of what was delivered to their fathers. The affairs of the state were badly administered, and the highest honors were gained by favor, bribery, or violence. Hypocrisy was substituted in the room of the true fear of God, and the practice of righteousness, the vices natural to mankind daily increased. And finally, they filled up the measure of their sins by crucifying the Lord of glory and rejecting his gospel, for which they have been made monuments of the divine displeasure unto this day. And now, my fellow citizens and much honored fathers of the state, you may be ready to ask, to what purpose is this long detail of antiquated history on this public occasion? And I answer, examples are better than precepts, and history is the best instructor in our institutions and morals. I have presented you with a portrait of a nation highly favored by heaven with civil and religious institutions, how yet, by not improving their advantages, forfeited their blessings and brought contempt and destruction on themselves. If I'm not mistaken, instead of 12 tribes of Israel, we may substitute the 13 states of the American Union and see this application plainly offering itself. That as God, in the course of his kind providence, has given you an excellent constitution of government, founded on the most rational, equitable, and liberal principles, by which all the liberty is secured which a people can reasonably claim, and you are empowered to make righteous laws for promoting public order and good morals. And as he has moreover given you by his Son Jesus Christ, who is far more superior than Moses, a complete revelation of his will and a perfect system of true religion, plainly delivered in the sacred writings. It will be your wisdom in your eyes of the nation, and your true interest and happiness, to conform your practice in the strictest manner to the excellent principles of your government. Adhere faithfully to the doctrines and the commands of the gospel, and practice every public and private virtue. By this you will increase in number, wealth, and power, and obtain reputation and dignity among the nations, whereas the contrary conduct will make you poor, distressed, and contemptible. We cannot but acknowledge that God has graciously patronized our course and has taken us under his special care, as he did his ancient covenant people. Now our part is to make a wise improvement of what God has granted us, and not neglect nor despise our disgusting privileges. For the best constitution, badly managed, will soon fall and be changed into anarchy and tyranny. Without constant care of your families, you will have bad servants, and your estates will be wasted. So we must pay constant attention to the great family. If we desire to be a free and a happy people, the power in all our republic is acknowledged to originate in the people. It is delegated by them to every magistrate and officer, and to the people, all in authority are accountable if they deviate from their duty and abuse their power. On the people, therefore, of these United States depends whether wise men or fools, good men or bad, shall govern them, whether they have righteous laws or a faithful administration of government, a permanent good order, peace, and liberty, or on the contrary, unsupportable burdens, and see all their affairs run into confusion and ruin. Preserve your government with the utmost intention and care, for it is the remarkable gift of heaven. From year to year be careful in the choice of your representatives, and of all higher powers of government. Fix your eyes upon men of good understanding, and known honestly, men of knowledge, improved by experience, men who fear God and hate covetousness, who love truth and righteousness, and sincerely wish the public welfare. Beware of such that are cunning rather than wise, who prefer their own interests to everything, whose judgment is partial or fickle, and whom you would not willingly trust your own private interests to. When men are called for the choice of your rulers, do not carelessly neglect them, or give your votes with indifference, just as any party may be persuaded or denigrated tempt you. But act with serious deliberation and judgment, as in the most important matters, and let the faithful of the land serve you. Let no man openly irreligious or immoral become your legislators. For how can you expect good laws to be made by men who have no fear of God before their eyes, and who boldly trample on the authority of his commands? And will not the example of their immorality defeat the value of the best laws which can be made in favor of religion or virtue? If the legislative body are corrupt, you will soon have bad men for counselors, corrupt judges, unqualified justices, officers in every department who will dishonor their station, the consequence of which will be murmurs and complaints from every quarter. And when all places in government are filled with the best men that you can find, behave yourselves as good subjects, obey the laws, cheerfully submit to such taxations as necessary for the public call. Give tribute to whom tribute is due, custom unto custom, fear unto whom fear, and honor unto whom honor, as the gospel commands. If you leave your children untaught to read, write, and calculate, and teach them no trade or husbandry, and let them grow up wholly without care, then they will be more fit for a savage than for civil life. Whatever inheritance you may think to leave them will be of no advantage. But on the contrary, train them up in the fear of God, in the acquaintance of this world, of His word, and all such useful knowledge as your abilities will allow. And they will soon know how to provide for themselves, perhaps take care of their aged parents, and fill the various stations of life with honor and advantage. Look around and see the growing youth. They are to succeed you in your stead. Government and religion must continue by them. From among these will shortly rise up your legislators, judges, ministers of the gospel, and officers of every rank. An ignorant people will easily receive idolatry for their religion and must bow their neck to the tyrant's yoke because they are incapable of using rational liberty. I call upon you to preserve the knowledge of God in your land and to attend to the revelation written to us from heaven. If you neglect or renounce that religion taught and commanded in the Holy Scriptures, think no more of freedom, peace, and happiness, for the judgments of heaven will pursue you. We must believe that the Son of God, who made the worlds and was sent by the Father with the proclamation of mercy to mankind, has declared to us. He died to redeem men from the servitude of sin and reconcile them to God, that made them to be raised in eternal life. The Christian religion, therefore, is confined to no particular nation, sect, or denomination, but is designed to call men to repentance and newness of life, to encourage their hope in the mercy of God, through whom the only mediator, Jesus Christ, persuade them to the most cheerful, preserving obedience, and comfort them under all the labors and sorrows of the world, and the natural dread of death, with the assurance of glorious immortality. Therefore, regard no man who are continually crying up their own sect, and employing their utmost zeal and art to proselyte men to their own party. They aim to strengthen themselves by your numbers and your purse, more than to save souls. Be careful of swallowing the wicked principles of men who influence you to portray all religions as uncertain, by persuading you that every kind of religion is equally acceptable to God if a man does it in sincerity. Read and meditate in the Word of God day and night, and diligently attend on the public ministrations which Christ has appointed in His church, and consider that as a true church, where truth as it is in Jesus preached it, and His plain instructions observe, whatever the particular form or denomination may be, avoiding all contentions and uncharitable separations. Be earnest to procure ministers who preach the uncorrupted doctrine of the gospel in all your towns. And if our religion is given up, all the liberty we boast will soon be gone. A profane and wicked people cannot hope for divine blessings, but it may be easily foretold that evil will befall them in the latter days. Unite in assisting the government in the execution of all good law, and let all members of our society consider that their own happiness depends on the welfare of the whole. I beg leave to say one word as to religion. With respect to the articles of faith, modes of worship, civil authority have no right to establish religion. The people ought to choose their own ministers and their own denominations, as our laws now permit them. But as far as religion is connected with morals of the people and their improvement in knowledge, it becomes of great importance to the state and legislators may well consider it as part of their concern of the public welfare. May the Almighty King always be in the midst of you, direct you and assist you, and press your hearts with his fear, and grant present and future blessings in reward of your fidelity. And now, if I have delivered words of truth agreeable to my texts, and pointed out the sure way to be prosperous and happy people, may these things sink deep into your heart and be accompanied with divine blessings. May the general government of these United States, when established, appear to be the best which the nations have yet to know, and be exalted by uncorrupted religion and morals. And may the everlasting gospel diffuse its heavenly light and spread righteousness, liberty, peace through the whole world. Amen. So, that was pretty long, and I cut out more than half of it. Those were from 1778, 1788. He gave that speech. I don't know. I think a lot of that we could apply right to this day. We probably need that speech, probably in a little bit more modern language, more now, maybe, than they needed it then. Because a lot of those things he talked about, we're experiencing the results of not following what he was asking them to follow at that time. So, like I said, the full thing will, once Steve gets around to it, he'll be posting those on there. So I encourage you to take a look at it, read through it, try to get a little bit of the mindset of, and he's not the only founding father who thought this way, by far. They all did, for the most part. And even the ones people try to pick out as, well, they really weren't Christian. Well, they still had those same biblical values they relied on. And they did quote from Scripture, and they used Scripture. So, anyway, hopefully you were able to get something out of it. And it'll also be posted online, right? And we've been putting stuff also on YouTube channel, so anybody out there hearing this, you can check that also, our website. And what we'll do afterwards, we're probably going to get a little something first, and then we'll probably come back and just do a little question and answer. Well, that'll probably be off camera, right? Okay. All right. Well, thank you for your attentiveness. Right. Mm-hmm.